The current flag of China dates back to 1949, when the communists took power. The new government, through newspapers, asked people to send in their designs for a new flag, requiring that they were mainly bright red and have Chinese characteristics. Bright red, of course, has been the color of socialism for a couple of centuries, but I'll probably get into that in another video. Anyway, over 3,000 people entered the competition, and Mao himself supposedly preferred a flag with a yellow strip across, representing the Yellow River. But a man named Zhang Liansong designed the winning flag. However, they removed the hammer and sickle that he had added. In the official explanation, they say that the Chinese characteristics that were required were the colors of the star. They're yellow because the Chinese race are yellow, but I think this is clutching at straws. But I'm just a little dubious about the official story altogether, because it also says that Zhang was looking up at the sky at night, thought about an old Chinese proverb, and said that the Communist Party was the saving star of the Chinese people. But a lot of the proposals that were sent in feature a star. So unless all of these people were looking up at the sky at night and thought of the same Chinese proverb, it's probably safe to assume that the inspiration for using a star probably comes from the USSR and their red star. Anyway, the larger star represents the Communist Party, and the four smaller stars represent the four social classes Mao aimed to unite as part of his concept of new democracy. Now that may be correct, and it's hard to determine, but it seems like a very obscure explanation. Especially because an earlier flag, that of the Republic of China, which was set up in 1911, made a deliberate choice to select 5 colors, so 5 was already important. But first, a little history. The Republic of China was established after the Xinhai Revolution, but the revolutionaries disagreed on which flag to use. Most of the flags that they were using were designed by artists, political activists, and students while in exile, one of which was the blue sky with the sun. Although this was favored by Sun Yat-sen, later used by the KMT, and is still featured on the flag of Taiwan, it doesn't seem to have much real history to it. It was designed by a man named Liu Haodong, and the 12 points of the sun only seem to represent the 12 months and therefore apparently progress. Another flag that was used during the Xinhai Revolution is the Iron and Blood flag. The 18 discs of the star represent the 18 ethnically Han provinces of China. So the people that favored this flag had some Han nationalistic tendencies. But it is the 5-colored flag that became the state flag, and I find this flag the most interesting. The 5 colors supposedly represent 5 major ethnicities of China, red being Han, yellow Manchu, blue Mongolian, black Tibetan, and white the Hay Muslims. So you could theorize that the 5 stars on the current Chinese flag also represent these ethnicities. Anyway, this flag became the state flag, the Iron and Blood flag became the army flag, and the blue sky and white sun flag became the flag of the Navy. Well, there was another flag that was used, but very rarely, and that was designed to show well-tilled fields, but looks a bit like a hashtag. But I'm going to focus on the 5-colored flag, because there's no definite explanation as to why these colors represent the ethnicities. So I had to do a little sleuthing. Yellow for the Manchus sort of makes sense. It was after all the color of the Qing dynasty flag, and the Manchus also created banner armies. Armies divided into groups according to the color of their banners, and the most prestigious of which were yellow, and the Manchus made up the bulk of these armies. However, yellow was often associated with royalty in China. Even Ming emperors wore yellow robes, and there's a mythical yellow emperor. So the Qing emperors could have just appropriated this tradition. Otherwise, going on to the red for Han nationalists, particularly in the early 20th century, claimed that they were the descendants of the Yellow Emperor and the Flame Emperor. So the Han could be represented by red, because of their connection to the Red Flame Emperor. As for the Mongolian blue, Genghis Khan came from the Borjigin tribe, and that literally translates to blue wolf. Plus, the Mongolians used to follow Tengriism and still uphold some of its traditions, and central to this religion is the Great Blue Sky. And they still tie blue scarves to ovos, a sort of nomadic version of a temple or altar. And in recent years of reenactments and celebrations, most flags from the Mongolian Empire are blue. This connection between Tengrism and blue is also why the flag of East Turkestan, those in the west who want independence, chose a blue field. Plus, the ancient inhabitants of the area were known as the Gok Turks. And this literally translates to blue Turks. The black and white, however, are a little more problematic, because some early sources say that the black was for the Hui Muslims, and white for Tibetans, while others say the opposite. White and black could both be good fits for the Hui Muslims. After all, Muhammad apparently flew both white and black banner, and they remained important colors throughout Islamic history. For instance, they were the flags of the Umayyad, the Rashidun, and Abbasid dynasties, and they are both used in the Pan-Arab flags and infamously in the flag of ISIS. But black and white doesn't really seem to represent the Tibetans at all. After all, the current flag of Tibet, which was adopted shortly after the creation of the 5 races flags, features no black, and white only represents the mountains. However, if you look at Tibetan prayer flags, you will usually find 5 colors: blue, green, white, red, and yellow. These colors, bar a little regional variation, form the basis of the Buddhist flag, a flag designed in the late 19th century by an American. But I'll get onto a little theory behind these colors in a little bit. But generally speaking, I don't believe that these colors represent the ethnicities at all. Like I said before, sources couldn't agree as to whether or not black and white represents the Tibetans or Hui Muslims, but even the blue can be disputed. After all, the Mongol Empire would more often than not use a tug banner made out of horses, and these were usually black or white. And these colors apparently had their own meanings. White was raised during peace and black war. Plus, contemporary sources and images show they flew banners of various colors. And Mongol dynasties in other areas of the world used different colors. For instance, the Ilkhanate in Persia apparently used a yellow banner. But that's, according to the Catalan Atlas, not necessarily the most reliable source. But either way, I don't necessarily agree that blue was synonymous with the Mongols. Especially because if you look at the Qing dynasty banner armies, there were blue banners, but Mongols didn't necessarily make up the bulk of these. And the same goes for the white and red banners. They weren't made up mainly of Muslims or Han. In fact, there was one army which acted mainly like a police force, which was made up of mainly Han troops, and this was the Green Standard Army. So you could argue that Han should have been represented by green. But keeping on the Hans, if you look at paintings of previous Han dynasties, there doesn't seem to be any real color that they favored. In fact, I have found more blue on the banners of Ming armies, but it seems that very few flags were the same, and that's the same for other dynasties like the Tang. They never chose one color flag over the other. In fact, for a long time in Chinese history, the flags were just used to show the generals where the soldiers were. So I don't believe the official explanation of this flag at all. Plus, I don't even think that the revolutionaries were the first to use this flag. That's because there are images from the 19th century, more specifically, the Taiping and Panthay Rebellion, that show the flag being flown by Qing dynasty troops, and there is some evidence to suggest Chips during the First Sino-Japanese War flew similar flags, except blue was replaced by green. Maybe the Republicans didn't know this and designed a very similar flag. However, during the First Sino-Japanese War, it was the Beiyang fleet that flew this flag, and many soldiers in the Beiyang army would join the revolutionaries, and despite trying to crush the uprising, the leader of the Beiyang army, Yuan Shikai, would become China's first president. Well, he did try to make himself emperor, and created a new flag for this. But of course, this colorful flag from the Qing dynasty had nothing to do with ethnicities. So I'm going to theorize it had something to do with ancient Chinese beliefs. In China, they believed there were 5 elements, and each of these elements had color. Water, black; metal, white; earth, yellow; fire, red; and wood, green. And this was a very important concept in China, and influenced a great deal from painting to traditional medicine. And this is also linked to the Tibetan Buddhist prayer flags that I brought up before. But each color not only represented an element, but also a planet, sensory organ, animal, etc. Now 4 of these colors are found in the Republican flag. However, there is no green, there is blue. But I believe that these are interchangeable to some degree. For instance, there are 5 deities, all of which have a color, and this is what the yellow emperor belongs to, and one is sometimes called the green or blue deity. And there are 5 dragon gods, which look after different bodies of water. Well, except the yellow dragon, he doesn't look after a specific body of water. Anyway, there is no green dragon, there is a blue dragon or azure dragon. This is the same dragon which features on the flag of the Qing dynasty, and also one of the 4 mythical creatures that represented constellations. Another one of these mythological creatures is the vermilion bird, and both of these are on the early Republic of China's coat of arms. Anyway, the Azura dragon guards the Eastern Sea, and the East was usually associated with wood or the color green. So you can see there that blue and green are somewhat interchangeable. But even in the 20th century, they seem to be somewhat interchangeable. For instance, when Japan invaded Manchuria in the 1930s, they created a new flag for Manchukuo. Now these used the same colors as the early Republic. However, I found 2 reasons behind why they chose them. The first, I think, further proves that these colors don't represent ethnicities. That is because the Japanese said that they represent ethnicities. However, they represent completely different ethnicities. Red on their flag did not represent Han. Instead, they represented the Japanese. Blue was for the Han, not the Mongols, and white was for the Mongols. But I did find a source that said they represented different locations, and blue represented East. So in short, despite what many people say, I don't think that the revolutionaries designed this flag, and I don't think that these colors represent ethnicities, but rather the elements. So the number 5 was important, and that may be why the current flag of China has 5 stars. But the 5 stars on the current Chinese flag also helped influence the design of the Hong Kong and Macau flag, both of which were adopted in the early 90s. Macau had a few proposals for their flag, many of which included green, the same green as on the Portuguese flag. But above the stylized bridge and lotus, you see 5 stars. Hong Kong, on the other hand, adopted their flag to highlight their connection with China. So they picked red. And there are 5 stars within the petals of the Hong Kong orchid tree.